So once more, hello everybody. Good to see you on a Monday here in the Deer Park at the Buddha Center. So let's get started like we normally do. A short period of bell meditation. Wherever you are behind your avatar, please get into a nice meditation posture. And as I ring the Ching bell here in Second Life, just focus on the sound of the bell. Really get that deep listening going, get that focus going, so we can all absorb some Dharma today. You're going to get distracted, happens to all of us. When it does, just gently remind yourself and go back to focusing on the sound of the bell. Then there'll be a short, after the short meditation, there'll be the 3 recitations, and then on with the talk for today. So I'll give you a moment, get into a nice meditation posture, and we'll begin at the sound of the bell. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the teacher. I go for refuge to the Dharma, the teaching. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the taught. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I have taken refuge in the Buddha. I have taken refuge in the Dharma. I have taken refuge in the Sangha. 3 pure precepts. Cease to do harm. Do only good. Do good for others. Bodhisattva vow. However innumerable all beings are, I vow to lead them all. However inexhaustible my delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. However immeasurable the Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. However endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it completely. Swaha. All right. So this would have been last Monday, I mentioned this article that I wanted you guys to go out and find and read so we could talk about it today. And I know I see some folks here that weren't there Monday or Friday, but that's okay. I'm going to read it too, because, I like to read these out loud as we talk about them. So let's just get right on with the talk then. The alleviation of, let's try this, start again. The alleviation of suffering and the development of a strong, wholesome personal character are goals of a Buddhist practice. In the midst of this global pandemic, there are unique opportunities to engage practices of generosity of spirit, tolerance, and loving kindness that are actions needed to reach that first goal, right? That goal of a strong personal character, or the alleviation of suffering. And also to realize the value of wholesome personal character focused on making better choices. And that, of course, is developing that wholesome personal character. Well, Nancy Gibbs of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, writing for the Washington Post, wrote and published an article named "Forget the Swabs, We All Need to Take a Character Test." And later she did an interview on the Skullduggery podcast and expanded on her views and her intent behind the article. So I want to read you the article, and if you can later, or maybe you already have, find the podcast and listen to it. It's very interesting. But I wanted to talk about this particular article because not only does it talk directly to the moment that we're finding ourselves in right now, but it also talks directly to a Buddhist practice if you can see the Dharma. So, I'm going to read the article first, then I'll talk about it. Again, here's the article, Nancy Gibbs, "Forget the Swabs, We All Need to Take a Character Test." Excuse me. Sooner or later, there will be tests. Temperature checks at every school, store, and workplace, nasal swabs, antibody tests, virus-detecting dogs, new tests we haven't even invented yet. And then one more test, the most pervasive and unsettling one of all. We're all going to take a character test. Federal lockdown guidelines are being lifted. States are rushing to do the same. Curves are flattening in many places. Summer beckons. But all that means is that choices that were being made on high now devolve to each of us. What intrusions will we tolerate? What sacrifices will we make? And how will we do the intimate math of personal risk when half the country says it is hard to know what is true about this wretched disease? And how honest will we be with ourselves and others about our movements, contacts, habits, and interactions? Fighting mass infection will likely mean mass invasion, this time of our privacy. The whole premise of testing and tracing is that data can protect us. Find who is infected, trace their contacts, and isolate them so everyone else can just go about their business. The promise of the approach, however, depends on being utterly honest about your symptoms, vitals, movements, and interactions. Even outsourcing your memory to your phone with a Bluetooth tracking app requires that at least half the people in your area have done the same in order for the tracking to be most effective. This is where the character test happens. How many of us will set aside our privacy concerns, download the app, and faithfully report the test results? Surveys of public trust suggest that it is richer, whiter, more educated people who have the highest levels of interpersonal trust, but those are not the populations that have been most at risk to contract this virus. Meanwhile, some wealthier people have shown that they trust other people to behave responsibly so they don't have to. Like that private plane load of partiers from London who were turned back when they tried to escape their quarantine and head to Cannes. And that's just the first part of the test. If you felt fine, have no symptoms, but get a call from a contact tracer that you were exposed to an infected person and need to self-isolate for 2 weeks, what will you do then? Even having a choice counts as a luxury at a time when household income have been flattened. Will you tell your boss and hope she will pay you to stay home for 14 days? Not for being sick, but for possibly becoming sick. Tell your spouse if she thinks you haven't left the house in a month. Or will you share your condition with another parent if your kid really wants a play date? What if you know a coworker has been contacted? Will you turn them in if they keep coming to work? All those stay-at-home orders protected us from having to make any choices or think about our risk tolerance. But as those edicts lift, we will own our choices. Your best friend's spouse has died. She is shattered. She wants to know if she should hold a funeral and if you would come. What do you tell her? Meanwhile, your aging mom misses you. She wonders if she will ever see you again, and who knows how much time she has. When it is okay to visit, and how will you know? As schools carefully reopen, do you send your 9-year-old daughter back, but not your 11-year-old diabetic son? You can't go to work if they're at home. What amount of income is worth what amount of risk? How much do you have to reveal, and to whom to explain your decisions? The legal adage that hard cases make bad law applies to this moment in an unforgiving way. Our choices under pressure will set precedents we may not like about what we will accept from governments, our employers, and one another in the future. We may not care much about freedom of assembly when assembling poses mortal risk. It's not just free speech, but the freedom not to speak that counts when intimate personal details become matters of public interest. How much extra leverage on workers will employers have as they start to rehire the 30 million people they've laid off? How will we protect desperate workers from being exploited on the long road back to normal? How many friendships will be tested as we each reach our own conclusions about what is essential and what is indulgent? So, a character test with no right answers because all the questions are hard, much of the evidence is inconclusive, and much of the data is conflicting. We'll wrestle with the ethics while being gaslighted by a president creating an alternative reality where everything is fine. Plenty of people will ignore him, a majority do not trust him, and his faithful will buy whatever he says. But that means the onus is on the rest of us to think about self-interest and public interest at the same time. To model behaviors we hope others will follow, and to take responsibilities of liberty more seriously than ever. Nice, eloquent words from Nancy Gibbs. And if you've ever read any of her other stuff, you'll know this is what she does. She's very good at this. Sooner or later, there will be tests. She starts out with that line, just to jar you a little bit. Sooner or later, there will be tests. Remember when you'd hear that in school, it'd make you quake in your shoes, right? Well, we're no different as adults. We still kind of get shaky around tests. But isn't every situation we face as a human being sort of a test? From a Buddhist practice point of view, they are. Because every experience we have is a lesson. The test comes with the next experience. Apply in a wholesome manner what was learned from the earlier experience, and you pass that test. And that application is another lesson. So the pandemic is causing a cascade of lessons and tests and applications, both personal and social, in each moment. Then she says, we're all going to take a character test. Well, isn't every situation and experience we face as human beings a character test? From a Buddhist practice point, they should be viewed that way. Every time a choice is made, it is dependent in large part on the person's character or their efforts to transform that character. The pandemic is requiring people to make very difficult choices, character-dependent choices that could lead to the alleviation of suffering or the heightening of suffering. A great strength of the author's message is found in the questions she poses throughout. Each question requires the reader to look deeply into their own character in order to give a rigorously self-honest answer. The question to follow must be what actions need to be taken given the results of that discernment. While Nancy Gibbs' questions are directed toward the current moment of the pandemic, the answers will have causal effects beyond this moment. So I took some of the questions. You guys that have been with me for a while, you know I'm really big on questions. I like questions. Questions are how we learn. And as I read this article the first time and I kept hitting all these questions that had such an impact on how I was thinking and how I'm thinking now, it made me look at particular questions a little closer because I was seeing them through the eyes of the Dharma and through the eyes of what we do here. Excuse me. Excuse me. So I'm going to hit on some of these. What intrusions will we tolerate? What sacrifices will we make? And how will we do the intimate math of personal risk when half the country says it is hard to know what is true about this wretched disease? Well, to effectively do the intimate math, the truth, as best as we can determine it, must be discerned. This isn't a time for misperceptions like, well, I believe that's what it is, or opinions, well, I think that's what it is. This is a time for facts, figures, and even a bit of future telling. The scientific and social complexities of this pandemic moment require us to find medical, disease, and social experts we trust and listen to what they say. Excuse me. Then act on it appropriately. Experts promoting human flourishing, happiness, health, harmony, through their corrective actions and thoughts deserve our attention. Those that aren't doing that don't deserve our attention. So if somebody's putting out information that is meant to help us, right, get through the fear and the anxiety and the illness, we need to listen to those people. But if it's somebody that is just trying to sow division or sell a product that may or may not work, we don't want to listen to them. So we have to discern who we can offer our trust to. Then she asked the question, and how honest will we be with ourselves and others about our movements, contacts, habits, and interactions? Well, this all boils down to rigorous self-honesty, something that I bring up in here quite often. Honesty is a crucial element on the path to alleviating the suffering caused by the virus. Honesty is one of the medicines, if you will, that we're going to need to get through this. In order to effectively trace the infections, medical professionals will need truthful and timely information. And this is information that must be freely and openly given. Note here that the author is asking how honest we will be with ourselves. Right? She says, how honest will we be with ourselves? There is the realization that without self-honesty, any further steps taken to minimize the impact of the virus will be less effective. Beyond the pandemic, self-honesty is a critical component for the development of a wholesome personal character. Excuse me. Now, of course, we also have to think about how honest we're going to be with others. And that kind of goes to that first question that we talked about. Another question. How many of us will set aside our privacy concerns, download the app, and faithfully report test results? Well, those of us here in Second Life, we know all about privacy concerns, right? This is something that I think we all have a stake in one way or another. But the answer to the question will depend on another question, the question of trust. Do you trust the governmental agencies that would gather and hold this level of personal information? Oh, and by the way, from what I've heard recently, these may not even be governmental agencies. These may be civilian agencies doing it. So a practitioner should be willing to freely offer their trust to another with the intent that that trust is dependent on the actions of that person or agency. That ideal makes this question tough to answer in situations where governmental agencies are viewed with suspicion and skepticism. And this is dangerous in a time like this. Still, a choice must be made, and that choice again is largely dependent on character. Do you have a trusting character or a not trusting character, for example? Here's another one. And you may have noticed these are all questions that require you and I to act with rigorous self-honesty. If the answers will have any impact, right? Any effectiveness. So here's a question. If you felt fine, have no symptoms, but get a call from a contact tracer that you were exposed to an infected person and need to self-isolate for 2 weeks, what will you do then? Well, it's a character test, right? And think of all the causal factors that are going to affect this choice. You have yourself to take care of, you got your family, you got your friends, and every other human being on this planet to consider. It makes this a really tough choice, unless your personal character points to, I really need to do this to help others and myself. So you have to consider, will your chosen path be a selfish one or a selfless one? Or will it be a combination of both? This is not an easy choice to make. This is where we really have to try to find that middle path, right? Because you need a job and you need to be healthy. Another question that was there. What if you know a coworker has been contacted? Will you turn them in if they keep coming to work? It's another question you're going to have to ask yourself as this time goes on. This is a character test. The choice can depend on how well you like the person, or how vital they are to the mission of the company, or whether you don't like the person. A lot of different character-dependent choices come up. And the choice can equally depend on how much you don't like the person or how much maybe they annoy others in the company. Neither should be causal factors, though, in this choice. It isn't a popularity or lack of that has any value in making this choice. It should be made with the ideals of human flourishing as dominant causal factors: happiness, health, and harmony. So with that in mind, again, do you choose to turn the person in or not? It's a choice you have to make based on rigorous self-honesty and your developing personal character. Or let's say existing personal character and developing personal character. How much, oh, here's another question. How much do you have to reveal and to whom to explain your decisions? This is a question we can ask ourselves about anything that happens to us. How much do we have to reveal? Who do we have to tell it to explain what we're doing or why we did what we did? Well, the decision to reveal and to whom is a character test both for you and for whomever is expecting an explanation. There will be persons, and this includes yourself, and organizations and governmental agencies that will want to know why you made a particular decision. Determining how much and to whom you answer should be dependent on how trustworthy you deem the questioner to be, and if you believe the answers you provide will be used to promote the alleviation of suffering and not to promote a social or political agenda. These are big questions and answers that are going to be coming up for us because we're not out of this yet. So Nancy Gibbs offers questions that could be on a COVID-19 character test. Her last sentence points directly to our Buddhist practice and how we must think and act during this moment. That very last sentence. But that means the onus or responsibility is on the rest of us to think about self-interest and public interest at the same time, to model behaviors we hope others will follow and take the responsibilities of liberty more seriously than ever. That last sentence just ties it all up for us. This encapsulates the character test. I often remind us here that it is our responsibility to make choices, right? We choose what we do. Now, granted, there's those causal factors involved, but in the end, it's our responsibility to effectively engage the middle path. We must strive to find that way, the way that acknowledges and accepts the importance of self and public interest, and that results in us being a wholesome example to others, and that brings each of us to the realization that our freedom is dependent on more than just our own wants and needs. So right now, you're in the midst of a very, let's call it an upfront, a very obvious character test. This is one where we can be that example to others. And here's a personal experience. And I hope that my actions have spurred some people, because I've been keeping track when we go out places, trying to keep a little mental run in my head about how many people are wearing masks and not, percentage-wise, and also about physical distancing. In the places that I have been in the last 2 weeks, give or take, at least 30% plus of the people are not wearing masks, at least in the places that I have gone. And in many places, small businesses especially, nobody was wearing a mask but me. My personal character, right, the way I want my personal character to be viewed is, I want to do this to protect others, and I believe that you would want to do the same. So when you see people that are refusing to wear a mask for whatever silly reason they can think of, then that exposes their character, right? Their negative aspects of their character. So as you go through this COVID-19 pandemic and the aftermath of it, let's use it as a character test, and let's use it to develop a stronger personal character for each of us. Let's look for those wholesome things that we can do and say and think as we get through this. Let's help each other when we can as we go through this. Because it will pass. It may take a while, but it will pass.